everybody. Good evening. I'm Jamie Anderson, and I own Downtown Books, an independent bookstore in Manio, serving Manio, Roanoke Island, and the entire Outer Banks. Part of the mission statement at Downtown Books is to offer authors the opportunity to engage with readers, and readers the opportunity to interact with writers. And tonight, I'm thrilled to be doing just that. Tonight's event is also being live streamed via Facebook to our YouTube channel. So, hello world from the Outer Banks. Pub Day is a big day for an author. After years of drafts, writing, editing, months of pre-release work with the publisher and publicists, weeks of prep for book tour, interviews, the big moment is here. The day your book baby meets the world. For a bookseller, having the launch day event is no less of a big deal, and I am honored to have been entrusted with this responsibility by Matthew. We Are the Light arrives with great advance accolades. It has received favorable reviews, been named a November selection by the Book of the Month Club just yesterday, and was voted the #1 Indie Next pick for November. This means that of all the books being published this month, this book received more nominations nationally from indie booksellers like myself than any other book. And in my world, this is a big, big deal. Matthew Quick is the New York Times bestselling author of The Silver Linings Playbook, which was made into an Oscar-winning film. He has also written The Good Luck of Right Now, Love May Fail, The Reason You're Alive, and 4 young adult novels. His work has been translated into more than 30 languages. He has received a PEN Hemingway Award honorable mention, was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize finalist, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, and more. The Hollywood Reporter has named him one of Hollywood's 25 most powerful authors, and he is also the author of We Are the Light. Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Quick. How you doing? So the last time we did this was for The Reason You're Alive, or The Reason You're Alive Now.
A long time ago.
5 years.
5 years. Wow.
Where has Matthew Quick been?
Well, where have I been the last 5 years? A lot of things have happened. So I came back from the Reason You're Alive book tour, and I had been flirting with sobriety at that time. And since I came home and I decided it was time, for many reasons, to go full all the way sober. And so I did that in 2018. And my big, great reward for getting sober was crippling writer's block, which was a lot of fun. And that lasted for a good 3.5 years, depending on whether you count like the screenwriting I was doing. But I couldn't write a novel for years. And I would sit down at my computer every day, and I would spend 8 hours on a sentence. And sometimes the sentence would be terrible at the end of the day. And sometimes a year would go by and I'd have 10 pages. And I would show these pages to my wife, like hyping them up, these are going to be good. And she would read them and she'd come back with tears in her eyes, like the bad kind of tears, like what happened, like what happened to my husband? And I think it was this humiliating and humbling thing that we can chuckle about now. And, believe me, I'm glad people are laughing. But at the time it was emasculating. It was scary. It was like suddenly waking up and not being able to see or hear. It was like something that I always took for granted was just gone. And I think that in early sobriety, I was having this experience of intense feeling. the alcohol is always numbing, all the time. So for most of my 30s, I would caffeinate all day long. I would drink Starbucks coffee, like pots of it. And then as soon as I was done, I would start drinking whiskey. And that was kind of, high, low, high, low. And it was also a way not to feel a lot of feelings. And when you write, particularly the type of writing that I do, which is not genre and is largely about mining my own personal problems, my own personal mental health issues, it takes a lot of courage to do that. And it takes a lot of courage to sit down on the page and kind of open your chest up and let everything come out. And what I found is that alcohol gives you a lot of courage, as we all know. And without it, I didn't have as much courage initially. And that led me, the crisis of that led me into entering into Jungian analysis. And we can talk a little bit more about Jungian analysis. The book is largely informed by it. But my analyst quickly said to me, he said, psyche shut you down. And psyche is just the Greek word for soul. And he said that, you came to this point in your life where you had to go through a transformation. And ego would have never allowed that transformation to happen. And so psyche shut me down, crippled me until my ego let go. And for most of my life, especially after Silver Linings, I published that book in 2008. And I was constantly talking about mental health. And I was telling everybody, hey, if you have a mental health issue, you should get help. But my dirty little secret was I was not getting help. I was drinking. That's what I was doing. So there was a lot there to process. There was a lot there to handle personally and privately, especially through analysis, before I was ready to kind of come out back into the world. And this book came after a year of analysis, 3 hours a week. And during that year, I thought I would never write again. I was always yelling at my analyst saying, when is it going to happen? Like, I'm paying you all this money. And he would just kind of sigh and say, it'll happen when it's the time for it to happen. It'll happen when you've healed. It'll happen when you've done the hard work. And it'll happen when it's time for that to happen, when you're ready. And so one of the things I've learned through particularly Jungian analysis is how much we think our ego can allow us to do things. But particularly when we get into middle life and second half of life, things change. I can't write 14 hours a day anymore like I could when I was 27. That's just a reality that I have to deal with. And kind of settling into this second half of life and really accepting my limitations, but also realizing that this is a chance for maturity and to grow into this different person, this more mature person who has a different mission and different things to offer the world than I did when I was in my 30s and early 40s and when I was drinking.
So I was doing a window display last week and putting up a lot of his backlist titles, some on the table. And your author photos on the back of a lot of them.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Benjamin Button.
Yeah.
I mean, I swear to God, he just keeps looking younger and younger. And I mean, does that correspond to how you're feeling inside? I mean, you talk about your former self. Do you feel like a new self?
I do. It's funny with the author. My current author photo that's in here was taken about maybe a year ago, and people accuse me of using a photo from like 10 years. They're like, that's not you now. And it is strange because sometimes I look at the old me and I literally don't recognize myself. And that was one of my turning points as I'd gone on vacation and a friend had taken all these pictures and sent them to me. And I looked at them, I'm like, who is that? I'm like, oh, that's you. Like, it was like, I didn't recognize who I was. And I think that alcohol has kind of, it puts you to sleep. It makes you stop seeing reality, and it's almost like puts you in a womb. It makes you feel warm. It makes you feel like you don't have cares, and it makes you feel as though you're like in this safe, sleepy place. And then when you wake up, of course, reality is right there. And so I had a few health scares that kind of boosted and kicked me into, not only stopping drinking, but also starting running and losing weight. And all of that has very much informed my writing. And I do feel like a radically different person. And sometimes it's scary. At first it was hard to to really process the changes and say, who am I now? I've had this idea of who I was for so long. And then you wake up and you're like, well, who is the guy that doesn't drink? And for a long time, for most of my career, I used to famously say, never trust a fiction writer who doesn't drink. I said that all the time. And then I became a fiction writer who doesn't. So you can imagine how disorienting that is. All of a sudden I can't trust myself anymore. And that's how it felt. And it took a while to learn to trust. Also, I think too that I started drinking as a way to cope with wounds that were very young. And so when you stop drinking, that young part of you wakes up and you feel very young again. And you're feeling those pains from a very young place, from a very young time. And that was excruciating. I mean, that's why I drank, so you didn't have to feel that. That's why I took Klonopin, so you didn't have to feel that. And so that was a lot and overwhelming. And so there's part of me that feels that my spiritual growth or my psyche is young because I put it to sleep when I was a teenager. And it never got to have that emotional growth because I was always, whenever I hit a wall, it was like drink, and it just, everything went away. So I never got to do the work. I remember a friend of mine, unfortunately lost her husband maybe a decade ago. And I remember being at the funeral and somebody coming up to my friend and saying, you've got to feel, like, don't drink, don't do drugs, like just feel the pain now, because if you don't do it now, you'll have to feel it later at some point. You're just pushing it down the road. And I remember thinking about that at the time. And then after I stopped drinking, thinking like, oh, wow, this is what she was talking about, because it hits you. You have, oh, that's the thing that I was trying to avoid feeling for all of this time. So I did feel very young and very vulnerable. My analyst used to say I was in a chrysalis, and he's like, you need this protection because you're reforming. There's an alchemical process going on where your whole psyche is reforming, and it's new and it's raw. So it was a very scary experience at the time, and now I look back at it and say it's a miraculous experience, and it was one that I'm very grateful for. But it was not a lot of fun at first to go through.
So, because you yourself have described the book, which we will get to the book, as a Jungian experience, a Jungian analytic experience, can you real quickly just break down that Jung theory in basic English for me? And why is analysis different than therapy?
Well, I'll start by saying that I am 100% not an expert on Jung. And there are so many books that Carl Jung wrote, and then there are so many books that people have written about Carl Jung, and there's different schools and there's different philosophies. But basically, as I understand it, in my analysis and what attracted me to it, was that Jungian analysis is a chance to take a deep dive into your psyche and to figure out not only who you were meant to be, but who you always were. Like who you were when you came into the world, before your parents got to you, before school got to you, before all the pain and the hurt and everything else. Like, who were you meant to be? The process is called individuation. And so that is the goal of Jungian analysis, to individuate, to become the most authentic version of you possible. And so what you do in analysis is you take all of the stories that you've been telling yourself and you examine them. And you examine these stories, and a lot of them could be about your childhood or the things you're angry about, or the people that make you mad in your life. And you recall all of that. You bring it all back to you. So we talked initially about a lot of projection. So if somebody is angering you in your life, usually that's a sign that you're seeing something about yourself and them that you don't want to see. And so it's all about like bringing it back to you and doing that deep dive within. The other thing that I really loved about Jungian analysis is that it's an emphasis on story as medicine. So some of us who were raised in a religious tradition, we know that you read the Bible or the Quran because you're trying to learn something. Jung famously, one of the ideas that he played with is that when we took the gods away, like the Greek gods, they used to have all these ideas about the gods, and we took them away and said, there's no more gods, and they became neuroses. The gods became depression. The gods became anxiety, like these things that you're feeling in your body. And so Jungian analysis also has a lot to do with the unconscious, and the collective unconscious and what goes on that we're not aware of. Our ego is what we see in this world, what we think, but that's just such a small portion. All of the things that we're not aware of. And so we do dream analysis. We talk about shadow work, which are the things that we don't want to see about ourselves, that we rage about in other people. And so there are all of these things, but really I would sum it up by saying it's really a study of yourself, and it's not a quick fix. The other thing I'll say too is it's less interested in healing symptoms than getting to the core problem. And so I remember very early on in my analysis, again, yelling at my analyst, and saying, when am I going to feel better? When's the anxiety going to go away? When am I going to start writing? And he just kind of smiled at me. And he said, oh, it's very nice to think you can do this in 4 months. And I said, well, how long did it take you? Because I knew you were an analyst. And he said, well, it took me 20 years. I said, oh, okay. This is not a quick fix. This is not an easy thing. It's kind of a commitment and a long haul study of yourself.
So We Are the Light takes place in a small town called Majestic, Pennsylvania. It's recently suffered a major tragedy. During the showing of a holiday movie at its historic movie theater, a 21-year-old gunman comes in and begins shooting. By the time he finishes, 17 people are dead. The narrator of the book, Lucas Goodgame, is a survivor, and his wife died in his arms. Friends and neighbors died around him, including his analyst's wife. He needs that analyst, Carl, now more than ever, but Carl won't come out of his home or see patients. So Lucas writes to him over and over, and these letters form the chapters of We Are the Light, and they tell the story of how Lucas finds a way to heal that brings many others along on his journey. Before you get all bummed out about it, this is Matthew Quick we're talking about. And as yesterday's Washington Post pointed out, his skill at crafting an engaging narrative around trauma is as strong as ever. When you read him, you don't feel guilty if your tears are mixed with laughter. So you've said you had the idea about this old movie house and community in crisis for years, but Where did the original germ come from?
Well, I've always loved going to the movies. And in my early years, in my 20s, my wife and I, Alicia, we'd go to the art houses in Philly very regularly. And we used to joke about how it was like going to church. And, if you think about what you do when you go to the movies, you sit down in a dark room and you look at these larger than life images, these huge, almost like godlike size images on the screen. And you study people and you study story. And sometimes you laugh and sometimes you cry and sometimes you feel better afterwards, or sometimes you learn something. But I've always been very attracted to going to the cinema. And then when there was the shooting in Aurora, Colorado, I found that really affected me. And I'd been a teacher, and so you would think that Columbine would have been, a bigger deal for me. But for some reason, every time I would go to the theater afterwards, I was like kind of looking around and checking the exits and who's sitting behind me. It became a little bit of like a quiet paranoia. And I remember I was doing an event in Ambler, PA, and if you look at the cover, this theater right there is the Ambler Theater in Ambler, PA. And I was asked to do a One Book, One Town event there, and they hosted it at that theater. I'd never been there before, and I remember walking up, and it looks like a cathedral. It's gorgeous. It's from I think it was built in the 30s. It has this really storied history. It's been refurbished, and I remember being up on stage, and there was a part of me that was, engaging with the community and having this great time with a sold-out crowd. It was really a lot of fun. And then there was another voice in my head, this paranoid voice that kept saying, "How do you know someone out in that crowd doesn't want to hurt you?" And it was like this weird, like, how do you know like everybody in that crowd is safe? And I remember thinking at the time, like, wow, that's a really weird thought to have. And then afterwards, I did my signing line, and I went out to the bar with the librarians, and we had drinks, and I was waiting for my car to pick me up, and I was looking at the Ambler Theater, and I just had this feeling like, I have to write about this place. Like, I have to fictionalize it. I have to write about a movie house. And that was in 2014. And I kept trying to write about it every year, and I just couldn't get it right. Like, I couldn't get the tone right. I didn't know how to access it. I knew I wanted to write about a tragedy in a movie house, but I just could not figure the novel out. And so I kept shelving it, false start, throw away, false start, throw away. And then when I entered into analysis, I remember thinking, I don't know, I had this feeling like I should start playing with that idea again. And again, I couldn't get it right. That first year I was in analysis, I just kept obsessively trying to write the first 10 pages over and over and over every single day. It was so demoralizing. And then I started to get really paranoid that my analyst was going to leave me because I was bonding with him tremendously. And I felt really dependent on him. And I needed those sessions. And it scared me because I didn't have control over him showing up. And so I had this paranoid thought that what happens if something bad happens to my analyst? Or what happens if maybe one week he's just tired of Matthew Quick and says, no more for you? And then I thought to myself, oh, what if I had a character where that happened? And then I thought, oh, well, what if he's in the theater and there's this horrible tragedy, and when he needs his analyst the most, on page one, the analyst doesn't show up? Like, what if that was the inciting incident? And then Alicia and my friend Nick Butler had been encouraging me to write another epistolary novel, like a novel in letters. And I said, well, what if he started writing letters to his analyst? And then I went up into my room and I typed in, Dear Carl, and then the writer's block was over. It was like 8-10 hours a day for a month, just every single day, go, 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 go. It was heady, it was euphoric, and it was as if someone flipped a switch on inside of me. And my analyst said, oh, of course, psyche was ready. You aligned with, in Jungian terms, we say the self, like you were aligned, your mission was, this is what you're supposed to do, everything lined up. You knocked ego offline. Ego did not want to write a book in letters at all. Like, I didn't want to do that again. But once I got that out of the way and the mission was there, it was just like, whew, and that's how I knew it was the book I was supposed to write. It took a long time to get there, but I also think too that I just wasn't ready to write that book in 2014. I had the seed for it, but I wasn't healthy enough. I didn't understand enough about psychology. I hadn't gone through this big journey, so I could not have written that book in 2014.
Well, I mean, if you take the whole Jungian experience out of it, you don't.
Yeah. And when I had the idea, it was not to write a book about Jungian analysis in 2014. Yeah. So it's strange how those things kind of commingle. And in Jungian terms, we talk about synchronicity and like these coincidences that happened. The fact that I was invited to do a speech at the Ambler Theater and that place just spoke to me. You could say, oh, just a coincidence, or, is there a reason why I went to that theater? Is there a reason why I was in analysis? Is there a reason? I don't know. Like, those are things we think about and ponder in my analysis.
So back to Lucas.
Yeah.
One survivor of this shooting. Wife was probably the first victim. Watches all the other people die, and then Carl, his analyst, won't see him.
Yeah.
So how does he survive this?
Well,
without spoiling, we're not going to spoil anything. We talked about that.
One of the things, as you imagine, Lucas losing his wife is bad enough, but then he comes out of the tragedy and the whole town decides that he's a hero. And of course, he does not feel like a hero. And we don't even know what happened in the theater at the beginning of the novel. And this is very alienating for him. And he initially goes to his survivors group and has disagreements with how things should be handled. And he kind of pulls back. And then he starts to write these letters. And we see through the letters how Lucas's psyche kind of holds him together. And one of the things that happens is he creates these narratives that seem very fantastical. He starts to see his wife as an angel. And he is convinced that she's visiting him as an angel. And at first, we don't know if this is a literal thing or a metaphorical thing, but as we see him write these letters and winning his analyst back, he creates this very fragile fantasy that gets him through this time. It's almost like this strange womb. And his wife visits him almost as a goddess at night. She has these huge wings. She's very much, in Jungian terms, we say the divine feminine, which he needs, because he did not have a very good relationship with his mother growing up. And then his wife was this beautiful woman that came into his life and put him in proper relationship with the feminine, and all of a sudden she's gone. And so he has to create this elaborate story and fantasy in his mind so that his mind will not fracture. And one of the beautiful things that happens in the novel is that the town and his friends and the people hold this fantasy for him in this really careful way until he's ready to let go of it. And so the novel really plays with this idea of story and narrative as soul medicine. And it might sound fantastical to think of creating a story where you see your wife as an angel, but we all create stories in our lives. Like we all tell ourselves stories. Whether it's just, if I work a little bit harder, I'll get that raise at work. Like that's a story we're telling ourselves to keep us moving forward. So this is a book about a man who needs a bigger story to keep it together than most of us need.
So on the flip side, you have another survivor named Sandra Coyle, whose husband was also shot and is part of the survivors group.
Yep.
But she immediately picks up the political reins
Yep.
of the tragedy and starts driving that chariot and tries to speak for all of them.
Yep.
We let this happen. We, did this and you. And so the issues at the core of mass shootings are so controversial.
Yeah.
I mean, it's guns, it's gun control, it's mental illness, public safety, it's so many things, some of the most divisive issues you can think of. But you managed not to politicize the book. Even with her, riding that chariot the whole way to the governor's office.
Yeah.
So how did you manage to not kind of cross that line?
Well, I wanted to bring that up because we live in very polarized and political times. And there's a quote from Jung that I love, and I won't be able to say it perfectly because my mind doesn't remember quotes. It doesn't memorize quotes, but it basically says, where there's a will to power, there's no love. And where there's love, there's no will to power, because one is the shadow of the other. And so if you love something, you don't want to control it. You don't try to control things you love. You try to control things when you want to have power. And so the book really examines these two paths. Like the path that we see most is Lucas, and his path is one of love. Like his path is one of trying to bring everyone together, and he wants to heal the town with art. He doesn't want to get into politics right now. He just wants to bring everybody together and heal each other. Whereas Sandra, and I have a lot of sympathy for her. She, her husband is killed. She wants to get political. She wants laws passed. She wants to make sure that this never happens again. And Lucas really recoils from that. And Sandra and Lucas are very interested in each other throughout the novel. Sandra tries to recruit Lucas in her political campaign. Lucas tries to recruit Sandra in his art campaign. And I think that that's really interesting because when we encounter our shadow self, we either try to change it or we try to attack it. And so that's the thing that Jung often talks about too, that like there's gold in the shadow. So like when Lucas is afraid of organizing this community like outreach program and the political, but he's also really good at bringing everyone together. And Sandra, of course, is wanting to go political, but she also loves her husband. So there's that in there. And so they're both hiding those things in order to elevate the other. And so they're very good mirror images of each other. But I definitely wanted to play with this idea because I think we live in a time where there's just endless talk of politics all the time. Everywhere you go, every place is polarized. But I think one of the things that we don't talk enough about, and we should be talking about at the same time, is the concept of love. And these people that might disagree with us or might have different opinions still need love, just like we need. Everybody needs that. And it's not that the politics aren't important, it's that love is equally as important. And so that was where I wanted to focus through this novel.
So I've been asking the questions. What else would you like to say about the book? I have more questions, but
I think one of the other things that I wanted to really examine throughout the book is this idea of positive masculinity. And we hear a lot on the internet in our day about toxic masculinity. And toxic masculinity is a bad thing. Nobody wants that. We should definitely be addressing that. But I find it interesting that we hear so much about toxic masculinity, but we seldom hear people talk about what is positive masculinity. What are men supposed to be doing? What is the function of men these days? And so throughout the novel, it was really important for me to show men loving each other and taking care of each other in ways that are not only good for them, but good for everybody in the entire community. One of the points that I make in the novel is that there's two brothers. One shoots guns and kills people. The other one shoots movies. Why does one shoot guns and one shoots movies? Well, I would say that because one of them was loved and one of them wasn't. And I think that is something that we don't talk about enough. Obviously, if somebody walks into a building and starts shooting people, it's horrific, and we don't ever want that to happen. It's very easy to say, that person should be killed or thrown in jail, or toxic masculinity, or men this or whatever. But I think it's harder to say, what happened to that boy? Like, what happened to that boy that made them want to do something that horrific? What hell was that boy put through? And I think when you look at some of these unfortunate stories that we hear in the news, and if you read about these kids that are doing these things, they've been through horrific things. And it doesn't justify what they've done, of course, but where are the people in their community that were supposed to love them? Where's that story? And I think that is a harder sell a lot of times, especially in the times that we live. But I think if we're going to find the solution to these problems, I think we need to ask, why are so many men feeling disenfranchised? Why are so many men feeling unloved? And when I talk about these things with men my age, they light up. Like, they want to talk about love, and they want to know that they are capable of receiving love and giving love. And these are difficult things. I didn't grow up with men telling me that, it's important to love other people, especially other men. I didn't even grow up with men who would give me a hug when I was growing up. And that is something that I'm trying to remedy in the second half of life through my analysis, through my relationships with my friends. But it's something that I think men are incredibly hungry to talk about, but we don't hold space for that. Like, we don't. And I think so many men hear about what men shouldn't be, and then they just kind of curl up and say, okay, I shouldn't be all these things. I'm just going to go and maybe I will drink, or I'll just keep quiet, or I'll just go over here by myself. But I think we need to find ways for men to participate in positive ways in community, and to nurture and support each other. And again, I think it's really important for men to know that they're worthy of love and worthy of giving love.
Did you say that Juliet Bookmarks is doing a One Book, One Town with this?
Yep.
So wouldn't this be a great book to do a One Book, One Community read on the Outer Banks? Get people reading, get people talking about these things.
I would love that. That'd be great.
Put that on my list. Were you just thrilled, shocked, surprised? This book of the month?
Yeah, this is my ninth time around, and I've never been on the cover there, so that was a shock. And it was really deeply meaningful too, because for those 5 years when I went away, I was kind of holed up in my house, and I did very few things. I would go to Wukasa once a week. That was one of the things I did. I would run in Nags Head woods, and that was pretty much it, And I was really hungry for community, and then to come back into the book world and to be received in that way, it's really beautiful. And I did an event in Denver earlier in the month. It was all indie booksellers, and it was just not only wonderful to have them embrace the book and to listen to my talk and embrace me and say kind things, but to just walk out onto the floor and see all these indie booksellers with all the tables set up and all the books, and they're really hungry, and they're looking for the soul medicine for their communities. They really want to bring that to their communities. It's not like, Amazon's not doing that. It's these good-hearted warriors in the towns of Main Street America everywhere. And they're going to these conferences, mostly paying with their own money, and they're looking to bring these beautiful books and this soul medicine to their communities because they care about people. And when I watched that, I said, that's really what my book is about. Like this is the community that I want to be a part of. And it was really just kind of overwhelming to be accepted by that and to be welcomed back into that community. No judgment. Welcome back. It's okay if you were gone. We're going to promote your book anyway. No questions asked. And that was very healing for me.
So 9th time around, but first time sober.
Yeah.
So what do you think book tour?
I actually, the Reason You're Alive book tour, I did not drink on that tour, but it was also a lot shorter than the tour that I'm going to be on. And so I think I've done a lot of personal work, and I hope I'm ready for it. But I'm going to be on a plane every day for the next 7 days, different city every day. So that's a lot for an introvert. And I'm very grateful. It's wonderful that people come out in all the different cities. It's beautiful. I wish I could just beam myself there without having to do all the travel, but I'm very grateful.
You can follow his journey. His website is Matthew Quick Writer, and it does have an events tab. And also, since March, in preparation for today, on the 21st of every month, he's been sending out a personal letter from Matthew Quick. And if you want to get into even more detail about this journey he's been on these last couple years, go to MatthewQuickWriter.com, click up on personal letter, and he's got them all archived. And it really is, it has been an interesting journey, going along with you. And I mean, he's just as honest as I think I've ever seen anybody be about where he's been and what he's been doing. So
my analyst says reality is medicinal.
Okay. So some authors have a color-coded index card system, and some have like a Venn diagram on the wall with sticky notes, and some use a legal pad and handwrite. What's your process?
Well, that process you just talked about describes my wife. That's what she does. I am an intuitive creative. So even if I tried to do that, it would not work for me at all. And so I have to kind of go inside of myself, and I have to find a voice. I have to feel my way into a story. And if you are an intuitive creative, you just know what that means. And if you're not an intuitive creative, you probably will never know what that means. And so it's difficult, because whereas Alicia can plot out a story and do all of the preliminary work, I have to wait until something resonates within me and until something constellates, and then I can bring it forth. And when that happens, it's very euphoric. And when it doesn't happen, it is incredibly frustrating. So, all the kind of cliches about waiting for the muse to show up and, the magic to come, like that's very much my process. So I sit down every day. I heard Walter Mosley said this. He said he had a poet friend, and he said every day he would sit down, and if a poem came by, he would catch it. And it was his job just to sit there. And if the poem didn't come down and it came by and he sat all day long, well, he sat there and he was ready to catch it. It's the poem's fault for not coming. And I thought that was a wonderful, wonderful way. So kind of opening yourself up and making yourself available to creativity, to these impulses, to the unconscious, and then seeing what arrives. It's very much what I do.
So do you have a set time frame?
Yeah, I mean, every day I'm usually, not on book tour, obviously, but I usually get up at like 6:30, eat breakfast, and I'm at my desk 7:38. And I usually am there until like 2 or 2:30 every day.
What if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're like, oh, do you run down, or you just say, it'll come back tomorrow?
I would probably run down if that happened. When I was in Denver, that happened, actually. I woke up at 3 in the morning, I started writing. And it was not a good thing, because I hadn't slept for 2 days. So I really would rather have been sleeping. But there are moments when it's coming, you just have to go with it. You've got to make yourself available, especially after suffering 5 years of writer's block. You show up when the muse is there, for sure.
How many years have you and Alicia been married?
25 and a half now, right? Yeah.
She said, yes.
Yeah, it would get me in trouble here if I forget.
So you survived non-sobriety,
Yeah,
then sobriety, then analysis.
yeah.
But most impressive is your marriage survives 2 fiction writers under one roof.
Yeah.
Is that because you have such different processes, or do you have like
Um,
don't talk about it times, talk about it times?
yeah, I would say, yeah, I'm just laughing because I don't know if we really have don't talk about it times. We kind of have running out of patience times, you know. I tell this story often, but when I first was deciding to become a fiction writer, I was going to be a fiction writer. We had the opportunity to spend some time with a Peruvian painter whom we know, and he was older, and I really looked up to him as like a real artist, real working artist. And I said to him, Gripa, I'm going to become a writer. I quit my job. I'm going to do this. And he said, it's wonderful. It's amazing. He put his arm around me. We had some beers, and he's congratulating me. And then he looked over at Alicia and said, what are you going to do while your husband's writing fiction? And she said, I'm going to be a fiction writer too. And then he said, you're screwed, as ever he said it in stronger language. He said, an F word there. And I remember being shocked at the time, thinking like, whoa, that story turned pretty quickly. But I think what he meant is that when you are around the creative person, there are many highs and lows, and there are a lot of emotions. And there are many disappointments. And the writing life, especially if you want to make a living as a writer, is incredibly hard. And I've been very lucky, and I realize that, but you just never know if the next sale is coming. You never know if the winds are going to change. It can be very brutal, and it takes a certain temperament, and it takes a lot of support as well. And so you have to kind of keep trading hats. Am I going to be the sad person today that's worried about the future, or am I going to be the cheerleader who's going to, say everything is going to be all right today? And I'm sure people with local businesses can relate to that as well. It's kind of the two of you versus the world.
So if you had a tagline, I think it would be "Good things ahead."
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
Good things ahead. I often sign emails that way. I think it means that if you keep working hard and you keep being honest and you find your own personal truth, that things will work out, and that they might not be the things that ego wants, but they might be the things that you need. And I found that to be true. I've heard the old cliche, like, if it's not happy, then it's not the ending yet, right? And and I think sometimes, narrative, we talk about narrative as medicine, but also narrative as fuel. Like, what story are you telling yourself? And so one of the things, good things ahead, if I keep working on myself, if I try to find out who I am, if I'm honest with other people, if I put up a flag and I'm good to the people that come around, we're going to create something good. And, when I didn't think I'd ever be in front of a room like this, but I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, and I kept doing the work. And it took me to a very humble place, and I did so much work with my analysts to kind of build myself back up. But wouldn't you know, and I wrote this book, people showed up. There were good things ahead. It didn't feel like that at the time, but it's very surprising. And there were many times when I thought, this isn't going to work, or people are going to forget about me, or too much time has passed. All those kind of negative things that the darker side of the mind or the soul can kind of put that poison in there. But I think good things ahead is a reminder to me and the people that I'm sending it to, that if we keep going forward and we keep moving boldly ahead, that there'll be something there waiting for us.
I love it. So instead of a this or that kind of last quick question, we're going to do a quick fire.
Nice. Little pun there, yeah. I love a good pun. No one's ever punned my name before.
Oh, yeah, I know. Favorite place in the world?
I know this is going to sound weird, but as an introvert, it's like inside of myself is a favorite. Like alone inside of myself is my favorite place. I love people, but that is probably true.
Yeah. Favorite non-alcoholic drink?
I'm a big club soda guy with a lime. That's my new drink.
Favorite cozy mystery author?
Alicia Bissett. She's in the room. You can buy her book
She's
after
in
the
the
show. Book's right back
Oh,
there.
and I meant
Pick
to
it
bring
up.
one up here with me. So
Yeah.
Matthew's wife, Alicia, wrote a book last spring. Well, it came out last spring. He didn't write it last spring. Called Smile Beach Murder, an Outer Banks bookshop mystery. It's set on a fictional Outer Banks island called Cattail Island. That's a mix of Ocracoke and Manteo. And she is neck and neck for our #2 book of the year at Downtown Books. Last week, she crossed the 500 copies sold threshold. So we're watching her come down the stretch and could end up anointing her. So if you haven't read it, it's great. Book 2 comes out next, is it April or May, Alicia? May, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, paperback of Smile Beach is April.
Yep.
So be sure to check Alicia out. That was my little softball there. Favorite college band or song?
When I was in college, you mean? I don't know. That's a tough one. Favorite college band or song? I don't know. I was big into indie rock. So probably, I don't know, like Super Chunk, keep North Carolina, Super Chunk or Archers of Loaf was a big one. Yeah, so probably bands that no one except for Scott Snow has ever heard of before.
Favorite podcast?
Probably This Young in Life, which is I listen to every week, and that's really what got me into analysis. It's a great podcast. And I'm actually going to be on This Young in Life this Thursday, so that's a good thing ahead thing. Alicia introduced me to This Young in Life when I was really depressed and down and out, and she said, "I think this might help you," and that led to analysis. And then I wrote this book, and then This Young in Life asked me to be on the show. So I mean, it was really like this kind of full circle moment of kind of manifesting something. It was it was a very surreal kind of full circle moment. So
this is where I'm going to do another shameless plug. But I was able to start listening today to We Are the Light.
Oh, yeah.
The audio version read by Lucas
Kirby. Luke Kirby.
Yeah. He does a great job. And if you want to listen to audiobooks purchased from an independent bookstore versus Amazon.com, pick up one of our bookmarks at the back to find out how you can subscribe to Libro.fm. And in addition to reading Matthew, you can listen to Matthew. And since I go between Duck and Manuel all the time, I think I listen to more books now than I actually physically read.
Yeah, and he's apparently, I didn't know this, but because they give me a list of actors that I can pick from. And so I just listened to all of them, and I didn't know who he was, but he's actually on a bunch of shows, and he's a very popular narrator. And I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure I've listened to some of his before, because I was thinking coming down the bypass, I'm like, I need to look up and see what else he's done, because I know this voice. It's a really good fit.
Yeah, the guy who did The Reason You're Alive it was fantastic, and he actually won an award for that too. So if you want to check it, yeah, it's really, really good.
Yeah. I really like that one. All right, just a couple more quick fires.
Sure.
Favorite thing to do on a day off?
Disappear into the woods. Yeah.
I had a feeling that was the answer. So this next one has to do where I think we first met.
Okay.
Favorite Roland Rulo book?
Wow. In Revere in Those Days I love that book. And that's another really interesting story. Then I was in the creative writing MFA. When I told my father I wanted to be a writer, he literally called me an idiot, and he screamed at me, and he said, "I will not pay for your health insurance." And that was my introduction. That was the support I got from my family initially. But when I went to Goddard and was in the program, one of the most surprising things that ever happened, because my father was so against me being a writer. He said, "Listen, my dad was a banker," and he said, "I was at this banker conference, and this writer was there, and his name is Roland Rouleau, and I'm going to send you his books." And whenever my dad gives me anything, I think I'm going to hate this, right? This is going to be awful. And so he sent me Rowan's books, and I was like, wow, like it sent me in Revere in those days, and I loved it. It's this beautiful coming of age story. I really thought it was wonderful. And my dad said to me, he's like, yeah, Rowan said that you could call him. I said, what? You know, and so I called him. I just kind of cold called him, and he picked up and he talked. It was like amazing. And then we became friends. And he was very generous with me when I was young, a young writer. Yeah, and yeah, so.
We did an event, been a long time now, with Roland Rule over at Arts Council. I know a couple faces were here.
Yeah.
He wrote probably one of my top 3 books of all time, called Breakfast with Buddha, which then became Lunch with Buddha and Dinner with Buddha.
Yeah.
And those characters keep kind of popping up in some of his other books. And I think he was going to play golf in South Carolina, and somehow I
He's a big
convinced
golfer.
him to come through here.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think even Alicia were there. I don't think he'd been on the Outer Banks that long.
Yeah, I can't remember what year. I remember he came to our house for dinner. His family's quite lovely. His 2 great daughters.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
sweet wife. So.
So the last question I have is, you leave tomorrow on book tour.
Yeah, tomorrow morning.
What books are you taking?
None. Oh, actually, I'm taking the book that I just finished, my manuscript that I just finished writing. So I'm going to take that to edit on the plane.
So you're taking work.
I'm taking my own book. Well, actually, when I feel very anxious, I get very anxious in Jungian terms, like when I go into a thinking function. And so I start to think, and that's not my function. My function that I'm strongest in is feeling. And so when I work on my manuscript, I get into a feeling function. It's actually very calming for me.
Okay.
So it doesn't feel like work if I'm editing with an editor, that's different. But like just to kind of go through the story and feel it is actually very calming to me.
So you want to open up to some questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So any questions from the audience?
Sure. Yeah.
When you write a book, do you have an end in mind and build towards it? Or do you have, it sounded like you started writing and then you just, wherever it takes me, and that's what I'll say.
Yeah, it's kind of commonly called like a pantser or a plotter. And so Alicia's a plotter. She plots everything out. She knows where she's going. I am a pantser, like fly by the seat of your pants. And sometimes I have an ending in mind, kind of a fuzzy ending, but I'll write usually until I know the ending. And then like the book I just wrote, I wrote the first act and half of the second act, and then I knew how it was going to end, so I went and write the ending, and then I fill in the middle a lot of times. And so, I think it was Robert Frost who said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, and also no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. That's kind of how I feel. Like I'm going on the journey. And I also write character-driven literature, so it's really a character. So I'm getting into the psyche. And so when I start writing, I don't know who the character is. It's a journey. They're telling me their secrets. And so the more letters that Lucas was writing, the more I started to understand about how his psyche worked, how he was processing events. And then I thought, okay, once I understand his psychology, what is the natural place that this is going to play out? And then once I know that, it's just about telling the truth in a way that is surprising and dramatic and hopefully will make you cry. That's what I try to do in a good way. Not the way Alicia cried when I was blocked.
Did you have that specific number of chapters in mind when you started, or
No.
did the editing process put it into that?
Well, I knew, once I got to, I don't know, maybe chapter 14, I thought, oh, wait a second, like 18 is really important. 18, because of Lucas's, what is going on with it, 18 comes up a lot in the novel, and that's very much intentional because he's obsessing about that number for obvious reasons. So.
Next.
I have
Amy?
a couple questions, but I'm going to try to do this one first in case someone else has asked. You're a former teacher.
Yes.
Did you model the young man, Eli, after a student that you had, or did you just make up his personality?
Yeah, I mean, Eli's completely a fictional character, but I would say that the work that I did with many teenagers and the counseling I did with many teachers informs all of what I've been writing. And it's kind of beautiful. When I was a young teacher, there were a few older men who were, grizzled veterans of teaching, and it kind of took me under their wing. And I didn't really, they were just guys I would drink with really at the bar, but, they would look out for me. And, a couple of them today made a point of sending me pictures of and they're not guys that read books. Like they're just not, they weren't English teachers, and, they all have my book, and it's like, it's really moving to me to see that I haven't taught with those guys since 2004, and they're still reaching out and supporting. And I think one of the things that I saw, the best of what I saw in teaching, were these really miraculous things that happened on a daily basis, where men and women would go and care about strangers' kids every day. And they would show up in like really beautiful ways. And like, I know my guy friends, they had their faults and they weren't perfect human beings, but every day they walked in that school, they were looking out for kids in their best interests. And that is a miracle, if you ask me. And so I wanted to outline that as well. I often write about teachers, and Lucas really going above and beyond for Eli. I saw teachers do that all the time for kids, really, really show up in really wonderful ways. Yeah. That's it, 2 questions. We got off easy. Maybe I'm just talking too long. Everyone's tired.
He's got another one.
More of a comment, but when I was reading, I felt that I felt that you were sitting at the computer and doing an entire chapter, entire letter before moving on before taking a break or anything, because it flowed so smoothly, and then there was a definitive end, and then it got you interested in the next chapter. Is that how it worked, or did you only do little bits and pieces at a time?
Well, I probably did write the rough draft of each chapter in one sitting, but then I would go and work on that chapter for days afterwards and edit it and massage it. And then Alicia would work on it, and my editor worked on it. So that like kind of smooth flow, I think is how you phrased it, is the product of a lot of polish and a lot of crafting. And so I would love to tell you that, yes, I just sat down and it came out perfect. And it took me, 20 minutes. But no, I usually write kind of a draft of a chapter, and then I'll go over it and over it and over it and over it. And I always like to, when I talk to kids in high school, I don't very much anymore, but when I did, I always say, how many drafts did you do of your last paper? And they'll very proudly, I did 4 drafts. And I'll say, I did probably, I don't know, like 200 drafts of my novel. Like it's like over and over and over and over again to accomplish that. Yeah.
Relating to that, is there a certain comfortable rhythm you find to get to a resting spot that brings you to a higher peak? And is it musical, or is it the energy that you find inside yourself that brings you through those different periods?
I do sometimes listen to music when I write. I have a very hard time listening to music if there's lyrics. I listen to Philip Glass etudes a lot, like kind of obsessively, like over and over and over. And like that's just kind of solo piano. It kind of puts me into the right trance or whatnot. But I do think that there's a certain flow, like there's an emotional flow. And if what I'm writing doesn't feel honest, or if it's not moving me, it'll just feel dead and I won't be able to write anymore. And so when I catch the truth of a character, or I really sink into that character's psychology, and I know exactly where they're going, where their blind spots are, where their psyche is trying to move them, then things usually start to happen very quickly. But that takes a bit of getting there. And with this novel, like coming up with Lucas, I started trying to do it in 2014. So, it's almost 8 years to get to that state. So, but it's tricky to describe like how to get into a flow state. It's almost like asking an athlete, like, how do you get into that state where you can't miss a 3-pointer? There are things you can do, listen to music, meditate, analysis helps, having a good week with your friends, or, a good experience, but there's no thing that you can kind of replicate on a daily basis. A lot of it's just, again, showing up every day, doing the work. Stephen King talks about, I remember he's on writing, he talked about, you sit down every day and then someday the guy with the magic dust comes from behind your back and throws it onto the page. And I think that's not really helpful, but I think the point is that you just have to, good things ahead, kind of, if you keep showing up, at some point you'll find the rhythm of your project.
I think what I'm asking is like breathing. When you get excited about a passage in the book, and your breath picks up and your excitement comes to you.
I think I feel.
You take a deep breath when you reach this point where you want to be.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of take a breath and let the reader down a little bit to pick that up again.
That's interesting. I don't know. I don't know that I'm that conscious of my breath while I'm writing. I tend to.
Just looking back.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to feel the energy in my eyes. If I'm really tapped in and I'm writing well, I feels like my eyes are like welling up. And it's not necessarily even like a cry feeling. It feels like an energy building, like right behind my eyes. And that's usually kind of a tell that I know, all right, I'm where I need to go. And I kind of trust that feeling. But again, it's not something that I can say, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make that feeling come into my eyes. It's just, yeah.
I was just curious about some of the edges and the middle, because you were talking about going through the middle.
Yeah.
You got to finish the last chapter.
Yeah.
When you figured out what the ending would be, then you might jump to that and then come back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'll go wherever it needs to go to get the job done.
You recognize that feeling inside of you, like feeling your eyes.
Yeah, definitely.
More about that than music.
Yeah.
I know there's a rhythm to music that you have to go with the body.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely feel it in my body. Yeah. Good question. I don't know who had that turn. I'll let you pick. Go ahead, Jamie. You can pick somebody.
Let's see what this aspiring writer would like to know.
When you wrote your first novel, how many rejection letters did you get?
Oh, yeah. Silver Linings was not the first novel that I wrote. It was the first novel I published. So I think I'd written 3 or 4 novels before that. But when I sent it out to my agents, I racked up, I think, 70 some rejection letters. And before it went on to be New York Times bestselling, bestseller. So I think, when you're trying to find an agent, it's really like it's about dating. If you try to date the wrong person over and over again, it's not going to work out. And agents famously will say they want to fall in love. And I think that's really it. You just need somebody who gets what you do and loves it and will champion it. And I read all the books, I did all the things you were supposed to do, and none of it worked. And I had picked out all of these different agents, and I had studied who everybody they represented. But I swear this is true. This is how I got my agent. I was so demoralized from all of these rejections. I was looking through just agent names randomly, and I saw Doug Stewart. And I used to coach basketball with a guy named Doug Stewart. And I said, that's funny. Let me send it to that guy. I didn't know anything about him. I did no research. And then Doug Stewart wrote me. He's like, dude, I love your book. I want to represent you. And he's at Sterling Lord Literaristic, which is a really great agency. So all of the preparation, like all of the studying and all of the, reading on how to get an agent, it was because I coached basketball with a guy with the same name. That's what led me to get the agent. Yeah. So.
About back over here.
Oh, okay, so your book time, sorry. You said when you were young, you said to your dad, I want to be a writer. What led to that? What inspired you to want to be a writer versus a car mechanic or something?
Pain, I think. I don't know. I found when I was in 6th grade, I wrote a short story and my teacher read it in front of the class. And I was so kind of angry about that because as an introvert, I didn't want to be singled out. But I remember her saying it was good and then I should keep writing. And I don't know, it was just something about that experience that was interesting. And then when I became a teenager, I lived in a family in a place where a young man with a lot of emotions didn't have anywhere to even understand what that meant. And so I had all these emotions and all these feelings, and I was starting to deal with anxiety and depression. I didn't know what that was, and you didn't even talk about that back then. And so I just started writing in a notebook. It was a little red notebook, and I would just fill page after page after page. And Then I remember I really didn't care about school. I didn't care about grades. But I remember being assigned, books like Tale of Two Cities or Old Man to Sea, and reading them and thinking, like, I know what this is. Like, just intuitively, like I got it. And I said, I think I can do this. And just reading Shakespeare, and my friends were like, "We're not reading those books. We read the Cliff Notes." Like, and I actually read them, and I didn't read them because I was trying to get a grade. I didn't care what my grade. I read them because I couldn't stop reading them, and I would sit on my porch at night and just turn pages, and I was just mesmerized. And I thought, this is for me. And it was the first time in my life when I felt really anything was for me. But of course, growing up, in suburban Philadelphia, in a family of people that didn't read. And my grandfather surviving poverty in World War II. And the emphasis was you need to make money, you need security. And so like my telling the people around me that I wanted to do that, I knew that wasn't gonna fly at all. I remember kind of in high school saying to my dad, "Hey, I think I want to be a fiction major in college." He's like, "Pick again," like, no, that's not happening. So, so I said, I'll teach because I thought that would be easy. And I could, I'd be able to be around books. And then I realized that if you care, teaching is the hardest job in the world. I wasn't prepared for that. So that's when I had to take a break. But I don't think you choose being a writer. I think it picks you. And it was not the thing that people wanted me to be. And it was a very hard thing to claim. In the place where I grew up, in the family I grew up, it was very much, it didn't win me many points initially. Of course, when you go to the Oscars, everybody's in. My dad's like, I was with you the whole time. He's like, my grandfather's telling everybody, everybody's in. And that was a surprise too. I couldn't believe how quickly everyone's opinion changed and their memories changed immediately. It was kind of amazing. So.
Yeah.
Something you said early in this discussion here about using alcohol and really making you numb. I did have a chance to read the book, and Lucas, seems to me, is numb himself.
Yeah.
Did you use that? Was a sort of perhaps a subconscious memory coming back, or something?
I don't know if it was subconscious memory. I think one of the things symbolically that I was doing by getting sober was I was killing the old version of me, and I had to kind of mourn that. And I think that Lucas goes through this process where he doesn't choose his path, but the old version of him is taken away from him, and he's got to mourn that, and he's got to go through this period, this transformational period. So I think symbolically, a lot of what Lucas is going through. And again, I don't want to compare my life to shooting in a movie theater. I mean, that's not the same thing. But on a symbolic level, I think his tasks were similar. He had to find a way to reorient to his world when he's not the same person anymore. And I think in early sobriety, that was something that surprised me. I heard other people talk about that, but I didn't realize that I was going through this transformational process. And I tried to pretend that it was kind of no big deal for a long time. But through my analysis, I've really learned that it's a radical thing. It was really like I'm not the same person that I was 5 years ago. Radically different. Yeah.
Oh, Nancy.
Talk about community, you describe books and the therapists and all that. And you think maybe coming to the Outer Banks, that Outer Banks kind of embraced you, because I feel like we are a really unique community. Because I know, get on books, my son used to get on school and they would go hang out at the school. And she allowed like all kids just to hang out together and walk with her. Of course, they would treat you well, but I think, do you feel like the Outer Banks, now that this is your home, does it make you feel like you're in your chrysalis?
Well, I think when I was in the chrysalis, it was very solitary thing. You know, it was just me in there, and I really didn't have any community at that part. And I think, you know, coming down to Outer Banks and getting sober shortly afterwards, I really hold up, and I didn't feel part of any community at all, and that was my own doing, and I needed to be there. But as I've kind of moved back out, I've really started to feel that, and like tonight, it feels wonderful. And I remember, I don't know, it was when was Parapalooza? Was that a
Last October.
yeah,
a year
last
ago.
October. I remember Alicia did the Parapalooza over in Manio, and I remember going to that event. There was a bunch of writers, I don't know, it was like maybe 10 or so, and
Yeah.
Jamie set the event up. And I remember just sitting there, and I think it was a Saturday morning at like 10 or 11, and there are all these people standing on concrete for an hour, just listening to writers read. And, you know, my wife was reading, so that was beautiful. But as I was listening to other people read, I kept thinking, everyone's still here. Like, everybody's still standing here. You know, it's amazing. And there was something really healing about that moment for me. And I remember writing about it and realizing that there is this community here, and there are people like Jamie that they're creating these opportunities that in my early sobriety that I really didn't participate in. Like, I kind of denied myself that. And I think it was necessary at the time, but as I kind of keep stepping back in, and tonight is a great example, you realize that it is necessary, and it is part of being a healthy part of the community. So, and I realize it's very much been out there the whole time. It was really me that was not participating. My first letter and my first monthly personal letter that Jamie alluded to, I think that was one of the lines that wrote, you know, I was away for a long time. It wasn't you, it was me. You know, it was nothing you did. So.
They also brought me Swedish fish, Nancy. They learned pretty early on if they came in with a little bag of Swedish fish from the candy store, I'd say, yeah, just put your backpacks in the back and do whatever you want.
That's great.
Any other questions, or is it time to sign some books? So Matthews will be at the back. Nice orderly signing line, please. We will archive the video once we have it on our YouTube channel. Signed books, we'll have plenty back at the store all through the holiday season. Signed books make great gifts, along with his backlist titles as well. So thanks to Nancy and Haven on the Banks for this great space. Thanks to Baldwin Video for being here tonight. And thank you.
No, thank you.
Good things ahead.
Yeah, good things ahead. Thank you.